Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary Shirley and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Welcome to the Great Women in Compliance Podcast with Mary Shirley and Lisa Fine. We're on the Compliance Podcast Network, along with many other compliance-centric podcasts. I'm Mary Shirley, and today we welcome Mark Stanley, General Counsel at Fresenius Medical Care Asia Pacific. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
Well, thanks, and you. We're really pleased to have you here today.
Well, I'm very honoured. I understand that I'm the first man to be appearing on this podcast. I've listened to many of the other episodes, so I'm in august company. So I'm very pleased and very honoured for that.
Oh, thank you for being a fan, and congratulations on your premier male status.
Thank you.
Now, dear listener, I know you're very astute and you may be thinking, no, that doesn't sound like a great woman in compliance, and you would be right. So Mark has recently moved into the General Counsel role at Fresenius Medical Care in Asia Pacific region after a stint as the head of compliance, chief compliance officer for the Asia Pacific region. And the reason why I wanted to get Mark involved in the podcast is twofold, really. The first is that we cannot be wholly successful at holding the conversation of the advancement of women without involving our male counterparts. They are absolutely crucial to the conversation. And secondly, when it comes to male sponsors, I think that they are an aspect that we must consider. A lot of people enjoy having female role models and female sponsors in their lives, but I wanted to showcase someone who has been a true cheerleader for women in all the time that I've known him. And so, Mark, I really can't think of a better example of a male boss who has been so supportive of me and of our other colleagues, including the women in the department. And so that is why Mark is on the podcast today. So Mark, your story is an interesting one. You had quite an unexpected career before arriving in the world of legal and compliance. Tell us about your background and journey to where you are today.
Okay, interesting. Yes, that is certainly one way. Frustrating, I think it was for my parents, as it took me quite a while for me to settle into any form of a career. I started off convinced that I was going to become the next greatest chef. Left chefing after a few years in that at exactly the point when being a chef was the coolest thing you could possibly do. I moved from that into various jobs in advertising and marketing and found those far too cool as well. And I settled into a career in law, doing perhaps the uncoolest thing possible and following in my father's footsteps. I qualified as a solicitor back in 2000, just at the turn of the century, which for the millennials amongst us, it makes me feel tremendously old. But that came on the back of being a paralegal for a few years up to then, working mainly around the criminal environment and some very, very uncivil litigations for lots of domestic violence and matters such as that, which was very important work to be doing. But as a beginning lawyer, it certainly set the scene for quite some conversations that I had to have later in my life. Since I qualified as a solicitor, I moved over into the non-contentious world, acting mainly for corporates. I worked on M&A activities, as most people do. General non-contentious work. I then moved into being an in-house lawyer for a reinsurance business. And I moved out to Asia just almost a decade ago, focusing on risk and compliance and legal. As you said, I'm now the General Counsel for Fresenius in Asia Pacific, which is, for those of you, I know Fresenius has come up a couple of times during the course of your series. We are an organization currently known for two things: being the world's leading provider of dialysis products and services, which is a great thing. And also, we've just settled a many years long investigation by the SEC and the DOJ into issues arising, but fortunately before I joined Fresenius. Now, prior to being the General Counsel, as you mentioned, I helped build the compliance function in Asia Pacific, really to show that Fresenius was taking compliance very, very seriously. And I was very proud to have you as one of my team members. So thank you very much for having me back, if you will.
Oh, thank you for that, Mark. I appreciate that. Well, going into our substantive questions now, Harvard researchers have looked into something they have coined the daughter effect, which is that men who have daughters hire significantly more women than those who don't. Firms with improved gender diversity deliver better performance and higher profits. As someone with twin daughters, what are your thoughts on the daughter effect and how you believe this may have influenced your management style?
Yeah, I read those surveys as well and those studies, and they, seem to describe an environment where men with daughters create a more liberal, less sexist, more diverse environment for their workforce. And I think that would imply that generally they're all round better in being balanced in terms of recruitment. I know from my perspective, I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that I want to have the best person for the job. I've got no doubt that the best qualified person is not a gender-specific role. It is somebody who can do the job and do it very well. And there are multiple facets to that. But one of the things which I take from my daughters is recognizing that anybody can achieve, anybody can succeed. It should be a completely flat playing field. And I recognize that when I see anybody walking in through my door. There is no, I hope, and I really do hope that there is no gender stereotyping that goes on. And I don't think that there is amongst anybody else I know who has daughters who have significant female influences in their lives. I think the recognition is at a very, very early age, that at the very, very early part of your career, that what counts in success is success, ability to achieve. And if you can ignore any of the previous history that has unfortunately dogged the working environment for so long, you'll get the right person. I know that I'll just crack on for a moment, when my daughters were born, they were both very, very premature, and they battled with the illnesses and the ailments that they had for 15 weeks or so before they were released from hospital. And throughout that period, there was nothing about what they were going through that was gender specific. It was all about their fight for life, and they succeeded based on them, not on them being male or female. They succeeded on their merits. And I think that was a message that has stuck with me personally for quite some time, and I think it exists in everybody who has young children, who have a moment of diversity, and anybody who sees their daughters competing with boys of the same age.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a good story. Thanks for sharing that one, Mark. What do you think is the role of men in compliance, if any, to advance women in the community?
I think that we need to ensure that there is a level playing field. I think it's not just men, by the way. I think it's women as well. We need to ensure that there is an entirely level playing field. I remember reading Sheryl Sandberg saying that in the future there will only be leaders. There won't be women leaders. There will be leaders. And I think that is the takeaway for me, that all we can do is ensure that we give the level playing field and the right fair environment for people to succeed. And I think it doesn't have to be. I'm not a big fan of positive discrimination. I don't really feel that gives anything other than it's not even really an unfair advantage. I think it's something which devalues the success of those people who do succeed. And I think what we do need to do is to make sure that we look beyond the sex and into the skills, and ensure that level playing field gives rise to the right people reaching the top.
I think that makes sense. I'm in agreement with you there. Absolutely. As a former employee of yours, I can only say good things about your management and support of me. And you probably won't remember this day, Mark, but I remember receiving my first invitation to speak at a conference when working for you in Hong Kong. And that day, I ran into your office to ask if I could have the time to attend the conference and fly out to Singapore. And you were nothing but thrilled for me and have encouraged me the entire time I've known you. If I was to ask you to be mindful for a moment about additional ideas and initiatives that male managers or peers could put in place to support their female colleagues in compliance, what would you suggest?
That's a very good question. Just going back to the thing about the conference, though, I'm a big believer in the idea that people succeed by standing on the shoulders of giants. So when you got invited to that conference, I was absolutely delighted because I could not go to a conference. I would not be attending. I would not be presenting, but I would be bathing in the reflected glory of you doing that. So it was somewhat narcissistic of me, I'll be honest, but I was delighted. I was delighted that you got asked. In terms of what anybody can do to ensure that female colleagues succeed, I think, other than that level playing field that we spoke about earlier, the idea of removing any assumption about anybody's ability or lack of it, that negative bias that people have, where they make a view that somebody is not going to be capable of something because of an invented reason. I think if you get rid of that, and you ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity to move forward, and you take opportunities that you can do to invert that. So you invert that responsibility pyramid, that power pyramid. You get the younger members of the team. You get the people who are going to fail, who are going to mess up, and you make it obvious that is absolutely fine, that people have the opportunity to stand up, and they're not going to make a fool of themselves. They're going to try, and that's always really important. So you stretch people, and you make sure that everybody has a voice in part of that stretching, and you reward people for doing the good things. And then you try to play to people's skills, rather than just looking at somebody as being a marketing person or an accountant or an auditor. You get interested in what they do, and you find out that hook which will make them confident of being able to have a place at the table. And I think that's one of the things which I recognize is lacking somewhat in women in the workplace. Certainly at a relatively early age, is that level of confidence to fail. And I think there's a huge burden placed, or a huge expectation placed on some, certainly of us, the younger teams who come through, who are trying to prove something, but they can't feel like they fail. And I think if you could make it perfectly obvious that everybody fails, everybody messes it up. You worked with me for a few years, you know that I do on a frequent basis.
It's not true.
And I think if you can do that, if you can make it an environment where people are comfortable getting it wrong, or people are comfortable making a mistake in a safe and non-impactful environment, they become more confident and they become more open in terms of the things that they are passionate about, that they are going to be enthusiastic about. So I think is that, don't assume, let people make mistakes, and ensure that everybody has a voice in doing so. And then when somebody gets it right, reward, encourage, push, and stretch them even more.
Great advice there. And going back to your comments about the conference, I've always been puzzled by managers who resent any kind of good experience or success of the staff reporting into them, because I've always thought that if my staff do really well, that of course says a lot about them, but isn't it also a reflection on me as their manager? So I'm really grateful to have had you of a similar mindset and always thinking positively for me when I've had a good experience or an accomplishment or success. You were really awesome at that.
Well, that's very kind of you. I mean, not to get into quote city. There's Steve Jobs said, why employ great people and tell them what to do? You should just employ great people and have them tell you what to do. And I think that is 99% of a manager's role, is to make sure that the team under him can flower and flourish, and everybody gets the benefit of that reflected glory in a narcissistic way as much as anything else. But the company gets the benefit of that in absolute spade loads. You know, if you are presenting at conferences, it raises the profile of how the company is viewed to view compliance. If I am taking part in a wonderful podcast, it raises the profile of my position within the organization. You know, my boss in Hong Kong is a very, very strong speaker and advocate of people having the opportunity to speak and advocate on behalf of the business. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really good opportunity. It should be something that we build into everybody's personal development. Having said that, there are people who are terrified of doing it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most loathsome things we can do is push them into that environment. I know what it's like to be nervous about getting up on stage. I've now overcome those nerves, but I could not imagine the terror that I would get if I was pushed into an environment that somebody thought was going to be good for me, but I knew that it wasn't. So we have to be respectful in doing this. But I think it should be part of everybody's career growth. If they are interested in doing something, they should get all the support of the business in doing it.
Great. Thanks for that, Mark. According to Business Insider, when hiring, we tend to favour candidates who are similar to ourselves, and this is known as hiring bias, and I believe you were alluding to this earlier. I've observed that when you hire for your team, you look for people who bridge gaps, which are your own weaknesses, which seems to be a great way to go about building out a well-rounded team. How do you make sure that you do not succumb to unconscious bias when hiring?
I hadn't realised you'd spotted that, but yes, you're absolutely right. I do. I like to fill the spaces in the team with, you know, the things that I know that I'm not strong at doing. And I think so. My Achilles heel is I'm fascinated by experts, people who people who know more than me. Unfortunately, there's an enormous list of those people. So the way that comes out is, when I interview somebody, I like to listen in how they engage me in their expert subject. And mostly when you talk to somebody, when you're interviewing them, their expert subject is themselves. And people who engage you in those conversations, people who get you interested in what they've done and how they talk about things is the most exciting part of that interview process, because you know that if you can get them excited about the subject that they're working on, they will be as enthusiastic as engaging with other people outside when they have to go and present that to people in the field. So if I have somebody come into my team who I'm going to put in charge of, you know, post-acquisition integration, whatever, they have to be somebody who can sell that story, because it's not a particularly interesting thing to do. It's going to involve engaging a large amounts of people in the team. So they have to be enthusiastic. They have to be engaging. And fortunately, you know, I have people who can do that. And I go through interview process at the moment to bring somebody on board who is going to be delivering that. When I hired into the compliance team, I was enthused by people who came in who were experts, who were interested. When I first met you, I think that was probably the first time I sat back and subconsciously interviewed you, because I was listening to the way that you were talking over one of those breakfast meetings you used to run. And I was thinking, you're enthusiastic about this. You understand the subject, but not only that, you engage the room in talking about it. And that is one of the most important things that we have to be able to deliver. And it's something which I find that women are spectacularly good at. There is something about the willingness to project empathy, that willingness to listen, the willingness to understand clearly what it is somebody else is driving towards, and not trying to line it with their own agenda or their own political spin or their own ambition. There is something about that process that seems to be, and this may be just my inner myth talking, but it seems to be something that's more present in the female members of my team than in the male members of my team, who are great and very strong, but they're very strong in other roles. And I think for the interactions with our team members outside of compliance, that empathetic touch is really, really key and really important.
Great. Thanks for those observations, Mark. In the Me Too era, what is your advice for high-powered men mentoring female colleagues?
That's this is getting. I can hear the creaking of thin ice as we walk out onto this question. I think. I mean, it's very easy, very trite to say, behave yourself, for God's sake. Just behave yourself. It shouldn't be hard. But I think that doesn't go anywhere near how deep this kind of stuff needs to happen. It needs to be thought about. If you are mentoring, if I'm mentoring somebody in the workplace who, in our current era, and it shouldn't be reflective of just our current era, but I know that it's very high profile at the moment, but who for whatever reason feels uncomfortable, whether that's uncomfortable with me or whether that's uncomfortable with anybody else in the organization, there should be that open channel of communication. If somebody who I was mentoring came to me and began to tell me that they were feeling uncomfortable about one of my colleagues, taking it seriously, taking it deeply seriously, being as strong a mentor as you can possibly be at that moment in time is absolutely key. And allowing for any of those communications, any of that discussion to come to the fore is crucially important. I think one of the worst things that can be done is to treat something that might feel as something that might initially feel to be a minor issue, treat it as a minor issue, because you're setting the expectations that it's not going to be heard. I think as a mentor in this environment, you absolutely need to treat any suspicion, hint, alluded to behavior as being serious. So I cannot imagine how hard it would be for somebody to come to me and say, I've got this problem. Because that is crossing a Rubicon. That is reaching out in an environment where traditionally the support hasn't been present, and sometimes in an environment where people feel that behavior has been encouraged. So it has to be done. Somebody coming towards me with somebody coming up to me with those kind of comments, any suggestion of any impropriety, I have to treat it with more respect than anything else on my desk at any time.
I think that's right. I'm thinking about your earlier statement about, it shouldn't be hard, right? But I remember being at a conference last year with two other colleagues in the industry and a beautiful friend, inside and out, very good mind on her as well. She'd worked very hard since we'd seen each other last on losing weight. And the first thing I said when I saw her was, oh my gosh, you look amazing. Have you lost some weight? And she said, yes, thank you so much for noticing. And then sort of later on, as we were discussing things, our male colleague, he hadn't commented on her outward appearance. And I was just curious and said, did you notice? And he said, yes, but to be honest, I don't know what is appropriate to say anymore. And I really felt for him in that moment, because I realized that, very intelligent, very sensitive men who have had good intentions, and they've been left in a state of confusion now as to whether or not that creaking ice is going to, fully crack underneath them. And so it's safer in their mind not to say anything at all. And I think, just really speaking on my behalf, I think it's a difficult one when you want to compliment someone's outward appearance. And so what I have found with women is that I tend to caveat it by saying, completely separate from your professional brilliance or, as much as I respect your intelligence, I just wanted to say that outfit you're wearing today looks amazing on you or something like that. And so I really feel like it is tricky now in that we want to always be respectful of what's on the inside. And yet, as humans as well, there are a lot of us out there who are very pleased if someone notices the effort that we've put into our physical appearance. So a sensitive situation, perhaps both for men and women now. And it pays to be conscious of how things come across and perhaps maybe being a little more conservative if you're not sure how the reaction will be taken.
I think that's absolutely right, and I hear and have heard quite a little bit of this terrible trouble that the men are having now that they can't compliment women on how they look. Honestly, I have little sympathy for it when I think of the issues that have been historically created in the workplace by objectifying women's success by the way that they look. It's very, very, very few people would come up to me and say, "Wow, Mark, you're looking great. You lost a load of weight." I mean, maybe obviously I haven't.
Yes.
But even if I had, it would not be part of that conversation. And there's no reason why that should be part of the conversation with women. I think between friends, between close colleagues, between people who know each other well enough.
Yes.
Then that's up to them. That's their friendly environment. But, outside of that, yes, I do have sympathy. Get over it. It's not hard. If I haven't seen you in the flesh for a couple of years, if you've lost a shed load of weight, well done.
Haven't,
that's awesome.
Unfortunately.
But I think I might be able to tell you that because I know you pretty well. But I would not walk up to any of my colleagues in Germany and make any sort of comment like that because it would be inappropriate. It would be out of place for the working environment in just the same way that they would not make those comments to me.
I think you've probably hit the nail on the head there. And I think I didn't realize perhaps I've got a bias. I'm far more likely to tell women that they look good than I am men, that I've noticed the effort they've put into their appearance, although I certainly will do both. But I think what you've hit on is that familiarity aspect. So if you're in a wholly professional arm's length relationship with someone, I think the context of that relationship is going to be clear, right? Like, have you met each other's families? Have you spent time outside of work together? And perhaps the more familiar you are and the more your personal lives have crossed rather than just the business side, you get a better feeling as to whether it's okay to be more personal talking about someone's outer appearance with them. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right, and I think there is an expectation that women put more effort into their appearance. There's an expectation that women try harder
which
to
sucks.
Look in a certain way, which does suck. And I think it's quite recent. As with most of my anecdotes, many of the facts are missing. But quite recently, there was a US talk show presenter with his female co-host. She wore the same dress, I think, 2 or 3 days during the week, and received, bordering on hate mail from the people who were watching the channel, complaining about that. She couldn't be bothered to dress up. She couldn't be bothered to do this.
Yes.
He wore the same suit for a year. And nobody made any mention of it at all. And I think, that is indicative, that's emblematic of these kind of issues. If you wanted to wear the same stuff to work, if you wanted to, I'm much more interested, and I hope that other people are much more interested in the talent behind the dress, in that ability to capture the imagination of a group of people, in that thrust to get in front of as many people as you can and share the passion that you have for the subject that you're talking about. I'm much more interested in that. I think people should be much more interested in that. I think we get, as a society, obsessed with appearance, and unfortunately that obsession manifests itself much more with women than it does with men, or much more about women than about men. Fortunately for me, and I don't think I would pass muster in any particular shape or form, but I think it's really unfortunate for women. So Yeah.
Thanks for that, Mark. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your time today for giving all of your comments. So valuable. And thank you for being the first man on Great Woman in Compliance.
I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's been an honor and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.